Hello, everyone. So, today I will be speaking about the Syrian refugee crisis, as it is a moral issue, and how European countries and other governments as well have a duty to help and accept them. So, so as long as there have been wars, persecution, and political stability, there have been refugees. Now, according to the United Nations, at the end of 2010, there were over 43 million people in the world uprooted because of conflict or persecution. Now, within this population, refugees are defined as individuals who are outside of their country of nationality. That is due to a well founded fear of persecution. Now, refugee assistance today is very difficult from when it was first organized almost 60 years ago, and that was when the mission was to aid European refugees from World War II. And today, refugees originate from countries throughout the world and from developing countries that are under wars and conflict. Today, I will be speaking about the Syrian refugees, what they have been through, and why European countries must be of help, more help for them in terms of accepting and integrating them, as well as other countries as well. So, to start off, let us define a refugee. So, who are or what are refugees? A person who has been forced to leave their country in order to escape war, persecution, or natural disaster. Now, there are people who are forced to leave their country due to the risk or experience of persecution. Now, the concerns of refugees are matters of human rights and safety more than they should be economic. Now, they leave their countries in order to escape horrible conditions and not because they actually want to. Their homes, their belongings, and their important people are left behind. Some are even forced to flee, or most actually are even forced to flee without any warning, and of course, they may have experienced traumatic events. So, the journey to safety is a very dangerous one because many refugees risk their lives in search for protection. And unless the situation that forced them to leave improves, well, they cannot return. Now, what are the needs of refugees? Well, refugees need basics to sustain their lives, such as food, clothing, health assistance, shelter, and hygiene. They need clear water. Children need a safe environment in order to go to school, to learn, and to play. More adults also need opportunities of employment. So let's take a look at a little background check of the Syrian conflict. So the key players, you have we have Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria and the son of the previous Syrian dictator Hafiz al-Assad, and he came to power in 2000. Now, he ruled with a firm hand, basically like his father, and he has been accused of human rights violations. Then we have ISIS, the Islamic State, the terrorist group that grew out of the Al Qaeda, and they control territories in Iraq and Syria. Then we've got the Syrian army. So those are former members of the Assad's army who defected during the uprisings and they created their own army to fight the regime. And then we have the Syrian opposition. This is a coalition of anti-Assad groups, and they are from different religious sects, and they unified in opposition to Assad's regime in 2012, November. So this coalition is recognized as the sole representative of the Syrian people. Now, a revolutionary wave, demonstrations and protests, which were violent and nonviolent, riots and civil wars started in the Arab world in the beginning of December 2010. And so, following that, pro democracy protests erupted in 2011 in Syria during the Arab Spring. Now, Assad's regime responded with violent suppression, and this triggered nationwide protests. Of course, as a result, violence escalated, and so the country descended into a civil war. And rebel groups were formed to battle government forces to control cities, towns, and countrysides. And eventually, ISIS capitalized on the conflict, and they took control of huge territories in Syria and Iraq. And so, as of 2015, the death toll had risen to about 310,000 and still counting. So, why do the Syrians flee their homes? The first obvious reason is definitely violence. So, since the Syrian war began, as said before, 320,000 people have been killed, including nearly 120,000 children. Now, about 1.5 million people have been wounded or permanently disabled, and that is according to Syrian Observatory of Human Rights. And the war, of course, became more deadly when foreign powers decided to join the conflict. Two is the collapsed infrastructure. Of course, within Syria, today, healthcare, education systems, and other infrastructure facilities have been destroyed. As you can see, the economy is shattered. Number three is children's safety. So the Syrian children that are considered the nation's hope for a better future have lost their loved ones, have missed years of schooling, suffered very severe injuries, and they have witnessed unspeakable violence and brutality. Warring parties even forcibly recruited children in order to serve them as fighters or even human shields. And so, since March 2010, almost 9 million Syrians have fled their homes. 3 million are in refuge in neighboring countries like Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, etc. Almost 7 million are internally displaced in Syria and are still in need of aid and are still in danger zone. So Central Europe became the getaway for refugees searching for sanctuary. 150,000 have declared asylum in the EU, and the EU have actually pledged to resettle 33,000 Syrians, and Germany pledged to take in 85% of them. Now, Turkey is also a leading country in hosting Syrian refugees, with almost 3 million today. Now, going to the EU refugee policy. Formed in 1951 in Geneva on the status of refugees, the UN Refugee Agency defines who is legally a refugee as someone who can apply for asylum in order to escape political persecution. In 1967, the geographic barriers were removed, and refugees could apply for asylum in any country who signed the agreement. Now, if a refugee can prove their claim to be escaping from danger from their home country, they cannot be persecuted from entering the country illegally. Now, Europe has also developed the Dublin Regulation, and this seeks to register refugees and prevent them from registering in more than one country. However, after being overwhelmed with refugees, Germany, as one of the countries, actually suspended this regulation, and the EU took into a mandatory quota to take in 120,000 refugees over the 2 years. Now, when it comes to the assistance of the EU, they served the greatest amount of humanitarian aid in comparison to their competitors. Now, during the spring of 2013, the economic situation of the EU was prioritized. And by the spring of 2015, the issue became the main concern among the Europeans. And today, Syrian refugees, find themselves stuck on borders like caged animals. Now, now what are their conditions like in Europe? So, the mistreatment of refugees in Europe today is a very alarming one. Thousands of people, refugees, are forced to wait outside in heavy rain with no shelter, sleep in open fields, parks, or even train stations, wait behind barbed wire fences, just like prisoners, and they are obliged to endure attacks by militant forces. So, what were the attitudes towards the crisis? Now, in Europe, different voices emerged. We've got the left wing. They wanted to let refugees in on a moral and humanitarian ground. These parties and organizations are generally supportive of the EU unity. Then we have the right wing. Of course, they do not want refugees to enter. Stop refugees from entering. Keep Europe European. So basically, these parties are often anti EU and are more conservative than others. Then we've got the middle ground. So those people want the EU to take a more balanced approach. They want to screen refugees, stick to current rules and regulations. And those parties are both on the left and the right. And they, as a general opinion, support European integration, such as Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia. Now, the European governments and security agencies today are bullying and harassing refugees whenever they can, and they're doing everything possible to get rid of them as quickly as possible. And maybe that is not done directly. Even the European people are divided over the refugee crisis. Many show compassion and desire to help, and others show disdain and xenophobia. Shocker. First of all, in violations of the EU laws, many member countries are building fences or have built fences along their borders in order to avoid the influx of refugees. So we have fear. So let's talk about some of the causes. So the first one could be, or is, the fear that terrorists might enter Europe and Islamophobia. And this could be solved by making more background checks over the refugees that they accept. And this could make more control. Plus, the media also plays a huge role in promoting Islamophobia on wrong terms. Not to mention that mass shootings also happen from people who are not Muslims. So, such ideas can be promoted to hinder such stress. Second is difficulties in assimilation and integration. And this is really not a major issue to bargain against because all countries around the world are made up of immigrants of different cultures and they all respect one another. So we are all human beings and we all should respect and accept each other. And I don't think that this is a hard thing to do. Third of all is the public finances on European countries. And basically, all country states that as a risk. All countries state this as a risk. So now, when it comes to this, refugees are a potential working force that could and would relieve the continent's economic hardships. 59.1% of male and 4% of female applicants are between ages of 18 and 34 years old. And, of course, a large influx of young people into a demographically aging continent needs to be understood as an opportunity and not as a threat. So, the absorption of refugees can be a very important tool in order to strengthen Europe's workforce. And so to speak, a report by the Research of Service of the European Parliament suggests that a well-managed refugee influx can lead to a positive GDP growth. So, European countries have a duty to organize the influx more. So, Germany does not have to take the million refugees they have. All the countries must work together to take in even numbers. In the end, refugees with diplomas are so much useful, not to mention the people that are without diplomas but are skilled, whether carpenters, tailors, farmers, and much more. So, this could even help fill in some gap for the elderly that cannot work financially wise, and the kids that have to learn. And add to that the aid that will be given from organizations as well. So, what now? Coming to an end. All countries are capable to help, that are capable to help actually, must do so. This is a very crucial matter and human rights one. And so, countries, especially ones that are about human rights, hello Europe, have the responsibility to increase their help and organize it as well. Now, worldwide, approximately 20 million people have been forced to seek sanctuary abroad. Governments do have a duty to help them. But most rich countries are still treating refugees as someone else's problem. Hiding behind closed borders and fears of being flooded, they have conveniently allowed poor and mainly Middle Eastern, African, and South Asian countries to be the hosts of an incredible 86% of all the refugees. Today, the world has become a very violent and an unsafe place. And so, in their quest to grab resources of the weaker countries, those rich and powerful countries and nations are creating warlike situations, political unrests, and civil wars to those said to be developing countries. Keeping in mind that many of those nations have great hand in those refugees' wars back home. And so they have a duty and an obligation to help them. The UN has become a silent spectator as an organization. And in most cases, the coverage of UN is just taken to fulfill covert motives. Even rich Arab and Gulf countries that are capable to help and are not are also responsible to do so. And it is also their duty. Now, several rich Gulf countries have the capacities to build safe camps for refugees as well, but all are inhumane to do such matters, even though they have big hands in the wars that are happening. Refugees today are used as a political weapon between countries, and all of this is to fulfill their own interests between each other with no shame at all. We ourselves today are destroying this world with our own hands. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.